Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to you. Welcome to another episode of Encounter. We still have our very special guest, Shubha Vilas, with us, who's an author, storyteller, a spiritual teacher, and also who works a lot with the corporate world. Shubha Vilas, thank you for still being with us.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be with you again, Roshan.
And we were talking last time about character building and the key to successful relationships. And we did mention that we would speak a bit about emotional intelligence. The reason being, a lot of people are qualified, have very high IQs, but unfortunately, when they find themselves in a difficult situation or in stressful situations at work, those people feel blocked and they can't perform. And I think this has a lot to do with emotional intelligence, which is probably the second step from a successful or a good character building. And you had a talk about this recently. Please share your sights with us.
In my understanding, human life runs on four wheels, just like a car. There is PQ, which stands for physical quotient. That's what fitness, health, hygiene, everything is about. Diet, sleep. A good balance of all these 4-5 elements gives you a good physical quotient. Today, society has a lot emphasized on physical quotient, and people are very conscious about their health, especially with the International Yoga Day being so immensely popular. And the second thing is intellectual quotient, which is what the whole education system is about. Having so many wonderful colleges and universities and schools across the world, where the emphasis is a lot on intellectual development. So people are focusing a lot on these two quotients, but there are two other quotients which are the back wheel of the car, which are often neglected, which is the emotional quotient and the spiritual quotient, EQ and SQ. SQ is very much about the development of integrity and character, which we spoke about the last time. If people don't have a very strong development of SQ, which is what I was calling as conscience, which is what I was calling as, looking at the Paramatma within our heart, speaking, all that, then you find low ethics. And today business world is all about having many times people having wrong ethics at the top level.
This is where you don't hear the voice anymore.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
yeah. So that's SQ. And the other one is EQ. EQ is about emotional quotient. It's all about understanding your own emotions and understanding others' emotions. People who are very, very qualified intellectually, highly talented people, often lack in the emotional understanding of life. That means they have a hollow self-image about themselves, and therefore they depend very highly on praise, appreciation, approval, ratings from others to decide whether they're doing the right thing.
It's a kind of validation.
It's a kind of forced validation, and it's a kind of a lack of depth in understanding oneself. I would say it's a hollow self-image.
But does a lack of EQ lead to awkward relations with people because they haven't developed this aspect of their life?
Generally, strong relationships is about understanding your own emotions and understanding others' emotions. When people misunderstand their own emotions and misunderstand others' emotions, that misunderstanding leads to strain in relationships. EQ is all about being able to perform, handle high pressure situations when it comes to your own self and when it comes to strain in relationships also. Whenever there's a conflict is a time when you understand what is your EQ level. Whenever there's a conflict both on an internal level and on an external level, that is a time when your EQ levels are very obvious. Somebody who has a very high EQ level in the midst of the greatest conflicts of life is stable. When you talk about a high pressure situation in one's own life, like for example, you're going through a very stressful situation in your job, or you're going through a crisis in your life, whether it is your own health crisis or a health crisis of a family member, or you're going through a conflict in a relationship itself. When you go through any of these three aspects or three situations of life, how do you behave? That shows what is your EQ levels. When people have low EQ levels, they flip out. They go crazy.
So the EQ and the SQ, the spiritual quotient, is it part of the 75% below the iceberg you mentioned last time?
Exactly. Exactly.
And it so we call it. Do we still call it character building?
Yes, very much. It's a part of character building because it's a lot internal. It's a lot about introspection. It's a lot about communicating with yourself. So when you know to communicate with the world, that's called success. But when you know to communicate with yourself, that's called happiness.
Shubha Vilas, you've worked a lot with the corporate world, and they say that everyone is highly qualified nowadays, especially when you go to for an interview. And the new factor that people are taking into consideration is, again, the emotional quotient. And there have been cases where people were not qualified, but they had the right attitude towards work and life, and they've gained experience over time that they become more qualified in the eyes of the people looking to employ other people.
See, being trainable is very important factor to being employable. Being trainable means having the attitude which allows you to accept feedback. If you don't have a strong emotional quotient, then you cannot handle feedback. Because whenever somebody gives you a feedback, your self-image hurts you. If you have a hollow self-image, especially very highly talented people generally try to keep themselves very lonely. The reason is because when they are with people, people keep finding faults with you. And especially people who are your well-wishers, they find fault with you not to criticize you, but this is called constructive criticism.
To help you be a better person.
Exactly. But unfortunately, when somebody thinks I'm the best, you're not open to feedback. Unfortunately, high intellectual quotient makes you believe that you're the best. And that's why talented people many times struggle with relationships, struggle with their own self-image.
What do you think are the main challenges nowadays?
Youngsters are trying to imitate people whom they consider to be their heroes. Unfortunately, when they end up finding the wrong heroes, they end up imitating the wrong people in life. Imitating is cheap. Emulating is very deep. What youngsters really need today are not heroes who impress them, but they need heroes who impact them. Impressing a person means purely on an external level. Impacting means touching them at the deepest level of their hearts.
Aren't your parents supposed to do that for you?
Yes, definitely they're supposed to do that for you. But unfortunately today, how many parents have actually developed themselves sincerely? Most parents are so busy just running around and taking care of the basic needs of life that they have really not had much time in self-development. So I find that many parents come to us. I know so many parents that I counsel and guide who have no idea how to raise a child. And they have become parents, but now they're wondering what it means to be a parent. The most important thing that a parent needs to give a child, more than the physical needs, more than the needs of education, more than the needs of the food, clothing, shelter, is a good example. Probably a child learns more by seeing than by being taught or hearing. When a parent is telling the child, you should do this, and the parent themselves is doing something else, the child learns by observing. When you are a parent, you should remember that you are 24 hours under observation. And naturally, that's a very big responsibility. So most people think the responsibility that the parents have is to take care of the child in terms of the providing the needs. But actually the responsibility that the parents have is to take care of the child in terms of providing a good example. So they may be very successful in providing for the needs, but unfortunately they fail to provide a good example.
Talking about youngsters, do you believe that spiritual growth is an integral part of developing your emotional quotient?
Yes.
I mean, I think they share quite a few similar values.
Yes. The spiritual quotient lies at the foundation of human development. In fact, most of what we have learned ever in our lives is based on the teachings that are given in the ancient epics, ancient scriptures, whether it be the Bible, whether it be the Quran, whether it be the Gita, whether it be the Bhagavad, whether it be the Ramayana, the Mahabharata. You look at any of these ancient books of wisdom, they have shaped human society today. Of course, there are people who have misunderstood what the teachings are and messed up, religion and understanding of what spirituality is. But those who have actually understood it well, they've realized that these books have the capacity and the power to shape individuals to become very, very amazing messengers of God, and to become very, very good human beings who can tangibly help society and, of course, help themselves first.
People are more tending towards the spiritual aspect of life. They're doing more yoga, they're doing more meditation. Would you agree to this?
At this point of time, people are clueless what to do in life, and they're clueless whom to go to for guidance. They have tried all the modern techniques and they've realized it's miserably failed them. Science has progressed immensely. Technology has progressed immensely. The field of education has progressed immensely. Everything has progressed immensely, but still society seems to be going backwards. The kind of stability and the kind of happiness that people had in the past, 500 years back, people are struggling with that today. And the kind of stable relationships that people had in the past, people are struggling with that today. Naturally, the question is, what went wrong? And therefore, people are looking forward to what used to be society in the past and used to be the kind of trends that people used to follow in the past, and realize maybe that's what was the right thing. And therefore, they are looking for the wisdom of the past to see if it can help them with the calamity that they have created in the present.
What do you think went wrong?
I guess we became overconfident about our ability to deal with things and lost taking shelter of the wisdom of our sages. The sages of the past were, though they lived away from society in the forests and in the mountains, they were seers. And they could see things that a common man couldn't see. And that vision that the seers had, that the sages had, that vision is what our scriptures are about. And then the sages, they would sit in their caves, they sit in their mountain tops and write books and give wisdom, that would give a direction to an entire society. And therefore, if society needs to really go back to what it was, the golden era, we need to start rediscovering the wisdom of the sages. Of course, the wisdom of the sages has to be packaged in today's context, in today's understanding. But at the same time, that wisdom is as valuable now as it was then.
Would it be safe to say that you would want to become a sage one day?
I don't know whether I can ever become a sage, because being a saint and being a sage is a very high thing. But definitely, I would be eager and very, very enthusiastic to follow in the footsteps of the sages of the past.
And this is what you're trying to inspire and motivate other people to do same in what you believe.
Exactly. Because I have realized that personally there is great satisfaction in studying the wisdom of the past and applying the wisdom of the past in your lives. And I have seen that the wisdom of the sages carry and they share can touch people's lives in ways that are unbelievable.
Well, who are the people who inspire you?
I would say 4 people in precision. One was Srila Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON. This knowledge that I understand and study based on the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad, this knowledge is always there. But this one man, he actually put the effort of making this knowledge available in a language that is that we can really understand today. Because a 70-year-old man began a mission, and in 11 years he wrote up to about 90 books, and the amount of talks and the amount of knowledge that he shared in those 11, 12 years has created massive change in society and of course in my life. In addition to Srila Prabhupada, I would say my own teacher, His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj, who is an author of the international bestseller, The Journey Home book. His wisdom has touched me probably like no one else. I think he has been one of my greatest source of inspiration, a living inspiration. I never saw Srila Prabhupada, but I saw Radhanath Swami Maharaj, and in him I find the wisdom of Prabhupada being very much alive. The third source of inspiration for me was my grandmother, because she was one person whom I heard a million times, especially the stories of the Ramayana, the stories of our scriptures, and whenever she would speak those stories, I would be just riveted. I think he was the best storyteller I have ever met in my life. Of course, nobody other than me probably would have heard her stories, except my brother and sisters. But her wisdom and her style of narrating the stories was something that really inspired me in my journey. Of course, the fourth, the people that really touched my heart the most are my parents. Probably I'm fortunate to have one of the most encouraging parents in the world. They have never discouraged me in any way. I made some really crazy and erratic decisions in my life, and every decision which seemed to be completely out of the regular style of decision making and the regular thing that people in society would do, I went completely in a different path. My father and mother never ever discouraged me from doing what I like to do, and that I guess has been my greatest support and my greatest source of inspiration.
I'm thinking your parents' reaction when you told them, I'm jumping from engineering, I'm going to study law, and now I'm going to be a spiritual teacher. That reaction must have been priceless. And,
I guess they got used to me.
Do you listen to music, any kind of classical, Western, Bollywood, or do you listen only to spiritual songs?
I like music that has meaning. Basically, I love listening to kirtans and bhajans, but I specifically like to hear music that not just is excellent in terms of the tunes, but it is it has a lot of depth from within the heart. Music that really touches the soul. That's the kind of music that I like to hear.
Are you reading a book at the moment?
Yes.
Which
I'm
one?
reading
Which
a lot of
one
books.
or which ones?
I generally don't read one book at a time. I read 4 or 5 books at a time. At present, I'm reading a couple of books. I'm reading a book called Chasing the Rhinos by Shyam Sundar Prabhu. It's a very, very thrilling novel. It's a biography of his own life. I'm also reading a book on mindfulness. I'm also reading a book on, there's a book by Rick Warren called Purpose Driven Church. A very, very insightful book on developing a community. And I'm also reading books on leadership, basically. Yeah.
So basically, for you to be able to study so much, to be able to gather all the information together, you also have to read a lot.
Yeah.
It goes without saying.
Yeah, I don't read books in numbers, I read books in kilos.
So, do you read every day?
I read in spurts because the kind of schedule that I have, I don't get to read every single day in terms of a time and all that. But when I read in huge quantities. Basically, I do a lot of speed reading. So I can read a book probably in half the time, than what normally people would take to read, because I've been developing this habit of reading for many, many years, probably from my early childhood. I would read in my early childhood, I was in 8th, 9th grade, I would read a novel a day. That was the speed at which I would read. So I guess that habit continues till today.
That's a lot of books read. Any movies that you like that has really inspired you?
One documentary on the life of Gandhi that has really touched my heart. There was one movie on Jesus of Nazareth that really touched my heart because of the kind of sacrifices that he made.
I have to ask you, do you have a preference for Western, Eastern food? Or you're a coffee or you're a tea person?
I don't drink tea and coffee. I drink milk.
Okay.
In terms of food, I have no specific preferences like that. But there's one thing that I don't eat, and there is a particular type of, I don't know if you heard of idlis.
You don't eat idlis?
Yes, you heard of idlis?
I'll eat for you, no problem.
That's the only preference in terms of saying no to something. Otherwise, I'm just happy with anything else.
What are the core values that drive you forward to do what you're doing today?
One thing I really stand for is determination. Many people have told me that, though I may not completely agree, but one thing for sure is that once I decide to do something, I do it. And I'm quite passionate about taking up challenges in life, and I don't like to do the same thing for a long period of time.
You get bored easily. You have to change.
I need to do different things, so that gives me a lot of inspiration to grow. Because in my understanding, leadership is about putting yourself in different situations of life and different challenges of life that forces to bring the best out of you. So I purposely take up challenges that put me in a completely uncomfortable situation, which really brings the best out of me. I have taken some really wild decisions in that sense, in terms of putting myself in a completely uncomfortable situation. I've started massive projects, and then when the project is at its peak, I've dropped it and gone ahead, handed over to somebody else. Because I realize leadership is about creating a legacy. And a good leader is somebody who can go ahead and create newer aspects, newer concepts, and newer challenges that he can take up, and then hand it over to somebody else who can maintain it.
Last but not least, the work you've done so far, you've mentioned, has been for the past 20 years. Where do you see yourself in the next 5, 10, 20 years? Again, it joins a bit, what are your core values, but where do you see yourself going forward?
In the next 4 or 5 years, I'll tell you what my thought processes are. I won't talk about 10 years because I don't analyze 10 years, more than 5 years basically at a time. In the next 5 years, I'm looking at writing at least about 25 books.
25 books?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And in the next 5 years, I'm looking at doing a PhD on the Ramayana. And in addition to all that, I'm also planning to start a training institute to create people who can be trained in our scriptures to teach them in the corporates and the universities. I want to create courses that can be taught in corporates and universities based on our ancient epics. So my aim now is to convert all my books into courses. That's what my next 5-year plan approximately is. In addition to all that, of course, on an internal level, on a personal level, I want to really steep up my personal practice of spirituality, and in terms of my ability to connect with people, in terms of self-development.
I have one personal question I have to ask you. How do you become such a comfortable speaker?
If I tell you honestly, you won't believe it.
Is it from all the storytelling you've been doing over the years?
I guess, but if you had seen me about 7 or 8 years back, you would have been surprised because I've never ever spoken in my life.
So is it something you've worked on to improve that aspect of your life?
I just kept speaking, I guess, and it just happened. Even in my writing, before 4 years, I had not written a single word in my life. I had not written a single article. I had not written a single blog. I just started 4 years back, and my speaking started about 7 years back.
Fantastic. Shubha Vilas, thank you very much for sharing so many insights with us. It has been a pleasure having you with us in the studios of the MBC.
It's been a great pleasure and honor to be with the embassy, and it's an honor to serve the people of Mauritius in some small way.
I wish you all the best in all your future works.
Thank you very much, Roshan.
We have now come to the end of this second episode of Encounter with Shubha Vilas. We thank you very much for your attention. Stay tuned and catch the next episode very soon.